Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Courtroom Confidential. We're doing our second ever live stream, and we're going to cover the Robert Tellis opening statements today. But I wanted to welcome all of our members, all of our new subscribers, and people, if you aren't a subscriber already, welcome to the channel for the first time. Here's what we're going to try to accomplish today. I'm going to give you a little bit of background about Robert Tellis and Jeff Gehrman so that you understand what's going on in the case. And then we thought it would be a good idea to just go through the opening statements of both the prosecution and the defense to get a landscape, to get the roadmap for what we should expect out of the trial that's going to unfold over the next couple of weeks. And it's funny because this is one of those trials where the media has been covering it. We know a bit about it, but there's some large holes in our knowledge, in what we understand as to how they actually pieced this case together. Specifically, how did they figure out that Robert Tellis was the person responsible for this murder? Allegedly. He hasn't been convicted yet. We can talk all about that. But how were the police able to piece this together? I think we have a pretty good idea. But I think we're going to find out a lot more about that as the trial unfolds, obviously, because if they don't, then the prosecution isn't doing their job. So welcome to everybody who's already in the chat. If you have questions, shoot them to me. I will try to get to them as much as I can as we're covering all of this. But first of all, like I said, if you haven't subscribed already, please take a moment to subscribe. It helps us out immensely. We have memberships open now. I'm not going to get into all of the details of it, but if you go on our channel and click join, you can see all of the different levels that we have and all of the benefits that we have. This is all part of it, folks, too. We're trying to add more and more content. I think we're going to start doing these recap live streams midweek more often, certainly as things are occurring and new trials are starting. And some new members that we wanted to give a special shout out to who joined right away and we've known for a while. So first to Jody Arrington, thank you so much. CJ in LA, Carol Newman 7842, Bucket Tree, Monique Margie 1, and Pamela Happy Vibes. You have all been OG members of the Courtroom Confidential crew. And we appreciate you all. And I hope that you hop on this live stream at some point to say hi as well. Okay. One more thing. Coming out Friday, or coming out this last Tuesday, we had a case on Rachel Morin that was a recap of her murder and everything that took place there. Really fascinating to go through that case and all of the difficulties that led to the capture of that person, and the it led investigators from Maryland over to Los Angeles, even down to El Salvador, to solve that really, really awful murder of a woman who just went out for a jog in her local park, and all of a sudden, now she's dead. A family's torn apart. So please check that out. We already have it out. It was released on Tuesday. Okay. So where do we stand right now? Jury has been picked. It's 7 men, 7 women. A brief background. Tellis is a politician in Las Vegas. Jeff Gehrman is an investigative reporter, but he's much more than that. He is a hard-nosed investigative reporter. He's the guy that goes after the mafia. Decades ago, he went after for real mafia members. He did investigative journalism stories on a guy who is the person that the character of in Goodfellas was modeled after. The Joe Pesci character in Goodfellas, if you know that movie at all, was modeled after. He went after that real life gangster in his stories in covering Vegas. As the decades go on, he kind of turns towards investigative journalism dealing with politicians and corruptions. Enter Robert Tellis. Robert Tellis is exactly the kind of person that he would cover, because there's all sorts of allegations about him being not just corrupt, but just a hostile work environment, treating his employees like garbage, making their lives miserable, and also maybe perhaps conducting an affair with one of his subordinates that some of the other employees actually capture on video. I mean, there's a huge backstory to this whole thing leading up to why Tellus is a royal POS. But Gehrman gets involved, and Gehrman starts to expose him, and Gehrman starts to turn this man's life upside down. And in doing so, really does not make great friends with Robert Tellus. So Gehrman tragically ends up murdered in his kind of side yard. He's stabbed to death. And what police, I believe, do, and the only reason why I say believe is it's still kind of unfolding how they did this, but what we know the colleagues of Gehrman do is they begin to figure out who had a beef with Gehrman. And Robert Tellus comes up as one of the first people. He's now put on the suspicion list. There's a videotape across the street. Again, we're going to get into all this in the opening statements, but I want you guys to know as much as I do, at least, getting into this. There's videotape taken across the street, which shows a person dressed in a bright orange long sleeve shirt, like you would see construction workers working in, with this wide brimmed, huge sun hat, who goes into the side area. Yes, there is a lawsuit. You're correct, Jody. There is a lawsuit with his employees. They were suing both him and the county and everybody else for the hostile work environment that they were dealing with. So he's got that as far as his other problems if he's not spending the rest of his life in prison. But going off of that description, the other thing that the police have at the time, looking at the surveillance video, is this maroon colored SUV. It's a maroon colored Yukon Denali. Police do a little bit of investigative work and realize that Tellus's wife has a maroon colored Yukon Denali registered to her. And it doesn't take many more fitting together of pieces to realize that he is likely the person that they're looking at in this case. They go conduct a search warrant on his home. They look inside of the garage, and lo and behold, what do they find but a chopped up sun hat and some sneakers that may have still blood on them. They perform a buccal swab, which is they swab the inside of Tellus's mouth, run some DNA. That DNA comes back to DNA found under the fingernails of Jeff Gehrman, and now they know they have a rock-solid case. They arrest him for murder. The trial then takes on a life of its own because it's delayed a bunch of different times because Tellus, being the narcissist that he is, can't agree upon having an attorney. A bunch of attorneys drop out. A bunch of attorneys get fired. He represents himself at one point. He's apparently a lawyer before he was a remarkable politician in Vegas, serving that community. And then we end up in court with one further delay dealing with a First Amendment issue about Gehrman's phone, because the police wanted to get into his phone, and his colleagues say, hold on one second. That phone is protected by the First Amendment because he's got a bunch of sources on that phone, having been a reporter for so many years. Okay. A lot of details. I don't know how much of that will become important to the opening statements that we're about to watch, but I wanted you all to at least get the landscape of what we're dealing with. Again, you're dealing with a case that's got surveillance, a high on the motive end of the spectrum, and then the DNA, if that wasn't enough to convince you that this man is likely involved. One last thing before I forget. His defense is not, it wasn't me. Well, it is, it wasn't me. But it's not, I don't know, you can't prove it. There's no proof beyond a reasonable doubt. His defense is, I was framed. I'm being framed. It's another one of these elaborate conspiracy theory types of defenses, to the point that when he was interviewed by 48 hours before all of this, you know, shockingly, he gives an interview to 48 hours before he's even on trial. He's asked about the DNA, and he says that the DNA is a plant itself. Because of all of that, because of who we're dealing with as a character, having represented himself, being a real a-hole as far as an employer, I think we're dealing with a narcissist who's got a very aggressive defense that he's trying to make, which all adds up, in my book, to we will likely see this man on the stand. I think this is one of those cases where we're going to see him testify, because I don't know how you get this defense in front of that jury, or how you stop this man who likes to control things, likes to be in charge, likes to tell people what to do. How do you stop him from going on the stand? So that's my prediction. We'll see if I'm right or wrong. I'm sure that you guys will let me hear all about it. All right, let me pour some coffee into my brand new Courtroom Confidential mug, coming soon to all of you folks. And let's go ahead and get started with the opening statements by the prosecution.
All day long on September the 2nd of 2022, Roy and Holly Bailey were concerned about their neighbor across the street. He was a man by the name of Jeffrey Gehrman. The Baileys and Gehrman had been neighbors for over 20 years, so they had come to know each other's habits. And on the 2nd of September of 2022, the Baileys noticed that Mr. Gehrman's garage door was open and his car was parked in his garage. And that was unusual. They called him, they texted him all day on the 2nd of September, and they didn't get a response. Finally, on the evening of the 2nd, Mr. Bailey went over and just shut the garage for Jeff just to protect his house. But at that time, they still hadn't received any response from their calls or texts. On September the 3rd, still having no response, Roy Bailey walked over to Jeff Gehrman's house and was trying to check on him. He found his neighbor, Jeff Gehrman, on the side of his house.
Can we stop it for a second?
Mr. Gehrman was over 60 years old at the time.
I had heard about this. That was a huge error that they had actually briefly showed a picture of his dead body on the screen. And we apologize that that came up here as well. We're just going off of Courtroom Confidential or Court TV's live stream of this, but that was fairly graphic. So I apologize for that. But just the other thing, I always feel like the first 10 seconds, first 3 seconds of the opening statements are the most important, probably. And that goes for kind of anything in life you're doing where you're trying to grab people's attention. If you don't have their attention within 3 to 10 seconds at the very end, at the very, outside, you've lost them. And this attorney, I'm sure she's very qualified. I'm sure she's very good at her job. But already I don't have a theme here. I don't know what they're, she's getting into the facts, and she looks like she might be a little nervous because she's diving straight into them. But, it would be nice to take a moment, take a breath, give the jurors exactly the theme that you expect to present throughout this trial. Robert Tellis was a man gone wild with his own ego, and he would stop at nothing to clear his name, whatever it is. I'm not on the county payroll anymore, so I don't know what it would be, but something to grab their attention. I feel like that was a missed opportunity. I'm going to shut up and let us continue to hear how she lays this case out.
So initially, it was thought that maybe he had a medical episode. Soon after, though, it was discovered that he had been murdered. Mr. Gehrman had sharp force injuries to multiple parts of his body, all over. He also, when they found him on September the 3rd, had signs of decomposition, indicating that he had not been killed on the 3rd, but was killed earlier. Investigators assessed the crime scene and took note of several things. One of the things they took note of was that Mr. Gehrman's phone was in his pocket. His car keys were in his pocket as well. His wallet with money was on his person as well, suggesting to investigators that robbery was not a motive in this case. Investigators looked around the surrounding area of where Mr. Gehrman was found, and they noticed damage to the bushes in the area of where the body was. They looked closer and actually saw blood on some of the bushes in the area by Mr. Gehrman's body. And they noticed it on some of the outdoor decorations as well. And they took note of that in their investigation. There appeared to be blood on some of those items. Detectives and crime scene analysts looked inside Mr. Gehrman's house as well. Inside the house, there was no sign of forced entry. There was no sign of struggle. All of his valuables were present inside the house. Oops, let me back up just a little bit. Sure.
I'm glad to see that we're not the only ones having technical difficulties here. The video does seem to be a little glitchy. We're trying to work on it. You know, sometimes that's just a function of the internet. Oh, so funny. Well, we'll let that play. Maybe, Kaylin, if there's a way to skip ahead, I don't know. But they're taking a little sidebar here. In the meantime, I wanted to thank Laura Waldy for gifting 6 memberships. That's incredibly kind of you. Thank you guys again for hopping on. We've got an intimate little group this afternoon to go through this, but we'll have a fun discussion. Just take a look at this guy to begin with. I mean, he looks like he's out of central casting for a James Bond villain. And jurors, I'm sure, you know, they're going to be thinking the same thing. I'm not the only jerk prejudging this poor guy before I've heard a piece of evidence. But I'm telling you, if you guys have done any kind of looking into this case and any of the research, or if you've watched that 48 Hours special, he really just sounds like, if everything that's being alleged is going to be proven to be true, he just really sounds like an awful human being. He was putting these poor people's, you know, lives, just making their lives miserable, to the point that one of them said something to the effect that she was thinking about taking her own life. I mean, just how awful is that? And then just, you know, the fact that you are such a narcissist, again, if this is all true, to take another person's life because they wrote some mean articles about you, and because you no longer have your cush government job, just incredible. I mean, of all of the reasons to commit murder, I'm not trying to say any of them are better than others, but this, I would put this on the far end of real, you know, debaggery to feel like you need to end this person's life just because they happen to be doing their job, and just because their job happened to be exposing the bad behavior that you had later on in your life. Yeah, it does look like Mr. Clean. He does look like Mr. Clean. He's the evil Mr. Clean. All right, well, our video got more smooth. Maybe I spoke too soon. I think this is okay. Yeah, video got much more smooth. I just want to make sure that we get our audio going. Are we missing audio? No, here we go.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. As I was saying, detectives and investigators checked the inside of Mr. Gehrman's house. There was no sign of forced entry. All his valuables were present, and there was no indication that anything had been disturbed anywhere in his house. So the scene ends up being kind of that side area of his house, those bushes, and where his body was. And as I discussed before, his car was present in his garage as well. Investigators did find some clues as to a timeline of the last hours of Mr. Gehrman's life. They looked through his trash and they found a receipt that was dated on September the 2nd, and it was a receipt for Roberto's Taco Shop, and the transaction time was 9:03 a.m. So detectives go and pull the video from Roberto's Taco Shop to see if they can find Jeff Gehrman present, and he's alive and well at that time. The video time at Roberto's was incorrect, so they went by the cash register receipt, the transaction time, which was 9:03 a.m. On the 2nd, and they watched, and he bought his food and went back to the car, and it was uneventful. One thing that was lucky for detectives was that the Baileys, the couple that lived across the street from Mr. Gehrman had a home surveillance system. And one of their cameras actually pointed to the front of Jeff Gehrman's house. So they pull that video and they see a figure come to the side of Mr. Gehrman's house. And the figure, as you saw, is dressed in orange. And that person stays lying in wait for Jeff Gehrman. Mr. Gehrman opens his garage and goes over to that side yard, and he's attacked.
Ah, so chilling to watch this, knowing that man's about to lose his life. Yeah, it's like out of a horror film. You just, you know, don't go into that, don't go through that door. It's also amazing to me too. We live in this day and age where, you know, if something isn't caught on video anymore, it surprises you. It, you know, it just seems like we are under constant surveillance from somewhere or the other.
After killing Jeff Gehrman, the assailant walks down from the side yard and goes back down Jeff Gehrman's street and just walks away.
God.
He's picked up on additional surveillance video a little bit further down the street. And eventually there's surveillance of this individual seen getting into a maroon Yukon Denali SUV. And so police try to collect all available video that is present in the neighborhood. Meanwhile, Jeff Gehrman's body was transported for an autopsy at the Clark County Medical Examiner's office. When his body was at the office, the cause of death was determined to be multiple sharp force injuries. A crime scene analyst attended the autopsy and collected fingernail clippings and scrapings from Jeff Gehrman's hands to see if there was foreign DNA present. Those samples were taken to Metro's DNA lab, and foreign DNA was detected in the right fingernail clippings of Jeff Gehrman. There was foreign DNA collected, but no one knew who it belonged to. So the murder happens on September the 2nd. Mr. Gehrman's body is found on September the 3rd. After that, Metro released through their public information officer images of that assailant and of the vehicle. So after Metro released those images to the public, asking for help if anybody recognized the vehicle or anyone recognized the individuals, they get a lot of calls come in. And some of the calls they get are about an individual by the name of Robert Tellis, the defendant. At the time, Mr. Tellis was the elected public administrator for Clark County, and a public administrator, when someone dies, sometimes handles the property and looking for next of kin in order to apportion property after someone's death. And in 2022, Mr. Tellis was running for re-election for his post as the Clark County Administrator. And detectives learned that Jeff German had written a series of unflattering articles about Robert Tellis. In those news stories, German alleged that Mr. Tellis had engaged in an inappropriate relationship with a coworker. He alleged that he was a bad manager and that he engaged in favoritism and bullying in the workplace. That was the first article. Mr. German wrote a second article saying that another individual had to be appointed to the public administrator's office in order to take over the management, alleging that Mr. Tellis was a poor manager. Soon after those articles ran in June, Mr. Tellis lost his primary election for public administrator, and Mr. German wrote about that as well. Mr. Tellis responded to the articles written by Mr. German and claimed they were politically motivated, that they were unfair, and he generally disputed what was alleged in those articles. And following this post by Robert Tellis, Jeff German wrote another article about Robert Tellis, alleging many of the things that I had previously discussed. Mr. Tellis also engaged in, I guess, saying unfavorable things about Mr. German on Twitter. He accused Mr. German of going through his trash. He accused Mr. German of being a bully. He accused Mr. German of threatening him, all over Twitter, which I guess is now X. Meanwhile, the police do more investigation, and they learned that the Tellis family has a maroon Yukon Denali SUV. And that is important, obviously, because that is seen in the video connected to the assailant. So the search for video, where it sort of started in German's neighborhood, now focuses kind of on the areas in between Tellis's neighborhood and German's neighborhood. And this is not just like, hey, is there any video out there? They really, really look for video. They have a grid, they assign officers, and everybody is looking for any video of this SUV between the two residences. Now, the police still had their timeline.
Can you pause it, Kaylin?
Knew that Jeff German was alive and well.
I just wanted to step in. Listen, I'm not trying to put this poor prosecutor, her name is Pam Weckerly, throw her under the bus here, but it's like, this is your smoking gun type stuff here. This is the, jurors want a story told to them. They want to hear, the how this unfolded. They want a narrative. They want something intriguing, catch their attention, realize that they're not wasting their time and missing their kids' little league games for nothing to be sitting here in court. Give them a reason to be interested in all of that. Not to say that this is entertainment, but this is to some extent entertainment, that you have to have a little bit of presentation value to the way that you present your case. She seems to me like she's a little bit nervous. I don't blame her for that. I'll tell you guys a story about a time I was a prosecutor and cameras came into court, shockingly, and how that can affect the way that you behave. But when you're getting to these crucial pieces of evidence, and that's what she just did, and she just kind of seems like she's just trying to plow through this as quickly as she possibly can. It's at that point where it's like, take a breath, lady. Let this all seep in. These jurors need to remember this stuff when it becomes important later on. Yeah, Pamela, he probably does need to accept a plea, but I imagine that plea will end up with the word life at the end of it. So that he's probably, like I said, he's a narcissist. I honestly think he thinks he's going to beat this. I honestly think I will call it and say, I think he will take the stand, and I think he's going to get up there and try to convince these jurors with his charm. Hey, Jay, every trial should have to take a theater class, in my opinion. Theater class, improv class, public speaking, something. The amount of training that I got before becoming a DA was embarrassingly little. But again, it's kind of like this. If this is a calling for you, you would expect that this is something that you would be a little more inclined towards. Again, Pam, you're doing a great job. Don't want to discourage you. You're getting all the facts out there. Let's see what else she has to say.
At 9:03 a.m. on the 2nd, and they map out the route between Robert Tellis's house and Jeff German's house. Now, Mr. Tellis lives on a street called Spanish Steps, and to get out of his neighborhood, you go down a street called Silk Castle, and then you can turn on a street called Red Hills Road. And on the morning of the murder of September the 2nd, officers found video of Mr. Tellis's SUV leaving his neighborhood on the morning of the murder. To give you some reference point, Mr. Gehrman's residence, as I said, is on Bronze Circle. Streets in his area include Wintergreen Drive and Rock Springs Drive, and detectives go all over that area to see if there's any video that they can find of that Yukon in the neighborhood. And they find on the morning of the murder that that Yukon was present on Rock Springs Drive, and they collect that video. Again, the cross street for Bronze Circle, Mr. Gehrman Street, is Wintergreen Drive. They collect video from Wintergreen Drive as well, and they see the red SUV or maroon SUV in the area as well. They see that maroon SUV interact with kind of workers at a construction site.
This PowerPoint is also annoying me. We're in 2024. Get a little bit of get a law clerk to spice this up a bit.
And the SUV does not go in a direct linear line anywhere. It's picked up on cameras at different times in the area of Jeff Gehrman's neighborhood. One of the cameras picks up the driver of the SUV. You can kind of see that orange clothing, and it appears that the driver is the only one present. At some point, the cameras in that neighborhood pick up this individual getting out of the car. And the individual is seen on Wintergreen, walking past Bronze Circle, going south on Wintergreen, going north, kind of meandering around the neighborhood near Jeff Gehrman's house. Ultimately, the individual is seen traveling in the direction of Jeff Gehrman's house on Bronze Circle, going further towards Gehrman's house on Bronze Circle, and then ultimately to the side of the house. And then in sequence, after the assailant goes to the side of the house, that's when Mr. Gehrman opens his garage door. He goes to the side and he's attacked.
In broad daylight too. All this elaborate planning with the costume and the scouting of the location, and you decide to commit a murder in broad daylight. Not quite sure why the choice to show this video again. Also, where this attack took place, concealed to some extent, but it's not like it's in the back of the house or inside of the house. I mean, you know, this was luckily caught on surveillance, but anybody walking their dog could have.
The assailant leaves Mr. Gehrman there in the rocks, has his bag with him, and walks down the street. He goes further down the street toward Wintergreen, and he ultimately goes back to that maroon SUV. That maroon SUV, though, then proceeds south.
Vegas
on
does, but
Wintergreen,
they're
and
Nevada
it actually
does, but
heads
they're
back
not
in the
looking at in this
direction
case.
of Gehrman's house. And you can kind of see it parked in front. The individual gets out, goes back towards where the body is. And then the individual returns back to the Yukon. The Yukon leaves Ron Circle, the cul-de-sac for Jeff Gehrman. It goes back on Wintergreen Drive. It goes west on Washington. It goes on Rampart, goes on Apple, and it goes back to Silk Tassel and Mr. Tellis's neighborhood.
That's great.
With this
that was
video
great.
Evidence
Again,
and
this is incredible evidence
of the conflict between
It's just
Mr.
being
Gehrman
lost a little bit in the
and Mr.
presentation.
Tellis, the police seek a search warrant on September the 7th, and they want to get a DNA sample from Mr. Tellis. They want to seize his phone, and they also want to search his house. On September 7th, the police make contact with Mr. Tellis, and they photograph him all over. In particular, they photograph his hands, and they notice on one of his fingers, he has a Band-Aid. They ask him to remove that Band-Aid, and he has a cut injury on one of his fingers.
Remember
While detectives
OJ?
are photographing and getting a DNA sample from Mr. Tellis, other detectives go to Mr. Tellis's house and execute a search warrant there. So they go to the house that very same day on September the 7th, and some of the detectives are looking through the living room area of the house, and they're kind of focused on the end of the couch, sort of underneath. They see a shoe, and there's actually a Ziploc bag on the right side of the photo. They examine the shoe. They find the companion shoe, but that shoe has been cut in half and sort of destroyed. And the bag, that baggie that was underneath that couch, actually contains pieces of the shoe as well. So they collect that evidence. And the reason why that was important for them is they compared it to the shoes worn by that assailant on Bronze Circle on September the 2nd.
Why not
They don't just search in the house.
shoes? Why
They
cut them
search
up
in
and
the
keep the
garage
pieces?
as well. And there's a gray kind of tub in the garage that sort of stores stuff. And they take a closer look, and they look at that bag there, and they photograph it and impound it. And they believe the bag is significant in their search because the assailant was carrying a bag that's exactly like the one they found in Mr. Tellis's house. So they find the shoes, they find the bag. They do a search in this garage, which is quite crowded with stuff. And on this, at the bottom of this red tool cabinet, they find a bag from, like a grocery bag from Sprouts. And inside that bag, they find a hat that has been cut up as well. And the hat, of course, is significant because it has the same identifying characteristics as the hat worn by the assailant. So this is all happening on September the 7th. Detectives return Mr. Tellis back to his house on September the 7th, and they actually rush to process his DNA sample that same day. And it's determined that that foreign DNA found in those fingernail clippings taken from autopsy of Jeff Gehrman, that foreign DNA is consistent with Robert Tellis. So they go back to his residence with the intent of taking him into custody for the murder of Jeff Gehrman. And they come to find eventually that he has inflicted injuries on himself, a suicide attempt, and they have to transport him to the hospital for treatment, but he is taken into custody. After that occurs, remember how I said that they took his phone as well. They're able to see some of the messages that occurred between Jeff Gehrman and Robert Tellis. One of those messages is from Mr. Gehrman on May the 10th. You can see it at the bottom of 2022. Where Mr. Gehrman says, "Hi, this is Jeff Gehrman from the Review Journal. I'm putting together a story on your office. I've talked to several employees who have said you have created a hostile work environment. They also say you've had an inappropriate relationship with one of your staffers, and I very much wanted to talk to you and sort of get your side of the story." After that message was sent, Robert Tellis actually does agree to be interviewed by Jeff Gehrman, and he invites him to the public administrator's office, and he sits down with him for an interview. And this is the story that ran digitally for the Review Journal.
Jody, it sounds like he cut himself superficially.
The Clark County Public Administrator's Office has been mired in internal dissension for 2 years, with workers claiming emotional stress, bullying, and favoritism. Robert Tellis, who leads the office, has also faced allegations of an inappropriate relationship with a coworker, Roberta Lee Kennett. In an interview with Review Journal investigative
Yeah, that was some of the video that the employees caught.
What is your reaction to the allegations from these employees that you have created a hostile environment in this office?
Yeah, I earlier introduced you to the other 17 members, and the other folks who have all come with.
Kaylin, can you pause it?
And they work hard, and together, them and I, we are.
See this? This is exactly what I'm talking about. This guy, the guy who gets accused by an investigative reporter that there is a hostile work environment taking place inside of his office. The same person who doesn't just deny it, doesn't say, you know, speak to my attorneys. The guy who decides, go ahead and interview me. By the way, let's do an interview on camera. And by the way, let's go ahead and let you broadcast that. That person is the kind of narcissist that you're not going to be able to keep off the stand. I don't know what I'll do. I will eat my own shoe if this guy does not take the stand, because I just think his attorneys, he's already burned through a few because they're probably all telling him, don't take the stand. Don't go with this "you were framed" theory. I think that this guy, they're not going to be able to keep him off the stand. I could be wrong, but I just feel that the same type of narcissist that says, put me in front of a camera and I'll explain to you why you're wrong as an investigative reporter, is the same type of person that's going to tell his attorney to step aside, let me go ahead and take the stand and swear an oath, and I'll charm all these people, you know, with my shiny bald head, that I didn't commit this murder, with DNA and everything else is linking me to it. Just fascinating when you really start to see the psychology of someone reveal itself. I'm watching this, by the way, for the first time with you guys. I did not watch this ahead of time. I knew a lot about this case. I had checked in on the opening statements throughout the day, but a lot of this is happening for the first time for me as well. So, that's why you can kind of hear me chirping in the background. And Kaylin is behind the scenes, as always, saving my tail on all of this, working the video. So Kaylin, please go ahead and start it again.
We are what is making a difference with the performance of this office. I've done my best to try to make everyone happy, but again, it's got to be within a certain framework. And people just cannot get to do whatever they want, and it's unfortunate that, we've got some people who were here from before.
Maybe that's his strategy. Dazzle them with his head glare.
They're happy and they're dedicated, and we're just here to do a good job.
Tellis, who's up for re-election in the June primary, blames a handful of old-timers for claims of a hostile environment in the office.
Yeah, I agree, Pamela. It's narcissism. I mean, just the mere fact that narcissists are people who feel like they can solve their problems if you just let them take the wheel and drive. Put me in front of a camera, I'll solve everything. That's exactly what you're seeing play out here. That's why I think Sarah Boone, same thing. Sarah Boone, I think, she doesn't even have an attorney. That's how far she went. Not only is she going to testify on her own behalf, she's just going to represent herself through the whole thing.
Personal relationship. What do you say to people about that?
Honestly, it's not true. I'm all of my friends, I'm not much I love my wife. And if you look at,
oh, thank you.
All
right.
People that do it on a daily basis.
I won't shut myself up.
But from my social media, you can see that I am about nothing but justice, fairness, and just being a good person. And it's taken me, it strikes me that this may even level like accusations like that, because I don't know, it's unreal. It's unreal the lengths that they're going to. They don't have any qualms trying to ruin my personal life to win this race.
You can also tell, as part of his narcissism, he thinks he's smarter than everybody in the room.
Also included a link with some video of Mr. Tellis and the alleged the person he was allegedly having an inappropriate relationship with.
An affliction common to attorneys.
Mr. Tellis
I can say that,
Jeff Garman,
being one myself.
and he's upset. He tells Mr. Gehrman, I don't know what to say. I told you about how much this has all impacted me. You heard from employees who are being harassed by these people, provided you, I think he means proof here, proof that I was doing my best to actually smooth things over after I had to make hard decisions. Still, you wrote an article that makes me sound like I'm the guilty one. That was not fair and balanced. So what happens after that? Mr. Gehrman contacts
that's an email
Robert
from a
Tellis
narcissist.
again, and this time the communication is about the county deciding to appoint another person within the public administrator's office to help run things. Mr. Gehrman messages Mr. Tellis, I understand that Mike Murphy has been brought in by the county, hired by a county as a consultant to work in the office with you guys for a while, and I wanted to see if you had any kind of comment about that. Mr. Tellis messages back to Mr. Gehrman, I will be providing it to you this evening. Later on, Mr. Tellis posts that statement that I had shown you earlier, where he says it's politically motivated, none of the allegations are true, this is unfair, I'm being unfairly attacked. All of the things alleged in those articles are false. And what happens after that? Well, Mr. Gehrman writes the story about the consultant being appointed at the public administrator's office.
Another
After those
sign
two
of a
stories
narcissist is
Mr.
playing the
Gehrman
victim.
contacts Tellis again. He says, I'm putting together another story on your office. This is now in June the 16th. This has to do with the letter you posted on your campaign website addressing the hostile work allegations. Employees view this as a threat of retaliation and have reported it to Human Resources. I'd like to get your comments. And Mr. Tellis responds back, it's fine. At this point, they've won. Do what you'd like. And of course, after that, Mr. Tellis loses his primary election, so he will no longer be one way or another in, as of 2023, the public administrator. Another thing that detectives found in Mr. Tellis's phone is something associated with like a phone extraction. So when you have a cell phone, it can be downloaded by this program called Celebrite, and it'll download a lot of the data in your phone. And one of the things that was downloaded from Mr. Tellis's phone is files that he accessed on Google Maps, and you can see there are thumbnail photos associated with those maps that he downloaded.
Oh, wow.
And it's probably hard to see because they're little, the thumbnails of what that picture, those two pictures are of. But here's a bigger version, and it should look familiar to you because it's the side of Jeff Gehrman's house where Mr. Gehrman's body was ultimately found. And that image was in Mr. Tellis's phone. Detectives also execute a search warrant on the office of Mr. Tellis at the public administrator's office. They search his work computer as well. And in some of the searching on his work computer, they find that he was looking up the make and model associated with Jeff Gehrman's car, which I think is a Honda. So that was found in his work computer.
This is the same
as well.
guy that wore the disguise, by the way, because he was really trying to cover up his crime.
June of 2022. In July of 2022, Mr. Gehrman does a public records request from the county. And the records request is for more documents and communications from the public administrator's office. And specifically, he's asking for emails between Robert Tellis and an individual by the name of Roberta Lee Kennett. He's asking for all communications and messages on Teams, which is a way, inter-office way of communicating. He's asking for text messages from their cell phones, and he notes, probably as all reporters do, that you're required as a county agency to respond to a public records request. That request takes place again in July of 2022. The county notifies Mr. Tellis that, hey, Mr. Gehrman is requesting additional information from the office, and they're going to work to fulfill that public records request. Mr. Tellis responds to the county that he would like to see whatever is going to be provided in the public records request and asks about how he may be able to do so. And then several weeks pass, and there's another communication from attorneys for the county about the public records request. And if you look at the date and time on this, this is a notification from the VA civil employees about that request on September the 1st of 2022 at 5:45 p.m. So that's about 15 hours before the murder occurs. He gets a notification about Mr. Gehrman's request. On a calendar, there's an email on the 1st at 5:45 p.m. and about 15 hours later, the murder occurs. In the end,
For a hot
This case
second, I thought that
isn't
was
about
his
politics.
calendar.
It's not about alleged
Sorry.
inappropriate relationships. It's not about who's a good boss or who's a good supervisor or favoritism at work. It's just about murder. And at the end of the presentation of the evidence, we'll ask you to hold him responsible for his conduct.
Okay, at this time, we're going to take a recess. During this
Okay.
recess, you're admonished not to discuss or communicate with
All
anyone,
right.
including your fellow.
I mean, here's two ways to look at that opening statement. Is one, as far as a presentation of the facts and leading you, giving the jurors a roadmap and leading them, realizing that all pathways lead directly toward the defendant. That was a remarkable opening statement. But as far as the presentation of it, again, I'm not gonna beef this poor lady. It was obvious that she was a little bit nervous. I feel like she was just trying to get through all of that as quickly as she possibly could, but she did her job. She got it all done. But it's just like some of these points were just absolutely remarkable. And it's like, let that simmer, enjoy that for a moment. Let that, take a pause for the jurors to realize the impact of what you just told them. But the things that stood out to me, again, I'm watching this for the first time. I know a lot about this case. I've been following it. We've been covering it on the channel, but I didn't know all of the detail that she just laid out here. And one of the more remarkable things to me is that you have a guy who is such a, and again, I go back to this, he's a narcissist, because a narcissist believes they can get away with something. They believe that they're smarter than everyone. They believe they can fool everyone. They believe that they can talk themselves out of any problem. And they believe that they are just a little too clever to be captured. And so his clever was putting on this ridiculous hat and putting on those clothes so he looked like a construction worker or a gardener in the area, and no one would suspect him. But then he doesn't take it upon himself to get rid of the clothing. I mean, that's the part that was the most exhausting to me is, okay, so you went through all these elaborate steps to conceal yourself, but then you didn't do something as easy as dumping the hat and the shoes and the clothes you were wearing that day. And what are you cutting it up for if you're not going to get rid of it? Did you really... Were you too busy that afternoon with other obligations after the murder to go ahead and dispose of the hat and the shoes, but you cut them up? I think it just speaks towards narcissism, that you feel like, I'm just going to go ahead and cut this up and throw it in my garage and that's it. Cops are never going to catch me. It's pretty remarkable as what it speaks to him. I want to thank a couple of people. Raven, who's in the chat. Ashley, who's in the chat. I see you guys all commenting. Ashley says, I hope they put his office lover on the stand. Would love to hear what she or he has to say. I do think it's a she. And I will tell you, I would love to hear that too. I don't know if they can shoehorn a way in that she will become relevant to this whole thing, but they might. I mean, that, they certainly laid it out in the case that was an important part of his motivation, was covering up his illicit affair. But I can't get into all of it now, but you guys should really check out that 48 Hours documentary or episode that was done on this, because they go a lot into how him and this girl would go and park their cars at the same location in I think it was a shopping mall parking lot, park their cars next to each other, and then they would both get into the back seat. And, through the tinted windows, you can kind of see the hanky and panky taking place. And then, she's saying to her colleagues that there's nothing going on. Again, that plays right into his kind of how he's typecast himself as this narcissist who does what he wants and gets away with what he wants. And he's going to tell anybody to just believe him and move on. I promised you guys a quick story, and I'll tell that, and then we'll get into Kaylin, if you want to get the defense closing arguments ready to go ahead and play. But I do appreciate, and I think that's why I'm going so easy on this prosecutor, what it is like and how it can be nerve-wracking to be on television and know that your opening statements are going to be broadcast. I've done dozens and dozens and dozens of trials to absolutely empty courtrooms. The only one inside were the parties involved, the judge and the 12 jurors, and it's just an empty courtroom. That happens all the time. Every once in a while, you might get some family members. Every once in a while, you might get a couple of your colleagues who check in to see your trial. I had a trial when I was a DA, and we knew that it was a quote unquote media case, but that usually just means that the LA Times was following it and wanted updates on it. Day one, opening statements, cameras walk into the courtroom, and the judge has signed an order allowing for cameras to cover our trial from gavel to gavel every single day, and we had no idea. And I remember in my vanity, my first thought was, thank God I got a haircut ahead of time. And then it became sheer panic of, oh my God, everything in my opening statements and what I was about to say is now going to be broadcast. It wasn't court TV, but it was going to be covered on the local news. And it was a surreal experience to be handling my trial during the day. And on my commute home, I could watch the news coverage with, clips of what I had done in court that day on the way home. So I will say it can throw you off of your game. And so like I said, my heart goes out to poor Pam Weckerly and what she may, the butterfly she may have been dealing with. And I'm sure she's going to put on a hell of a case. Doesn't sound like she's going to have to do a whole bunch with the amount of evidence that they have in this case, because this is some phenomenal stuff. If the DNA is not enough alone, all of the other circumstantial and mapping and video evidence and what's located on his phone. I mean, the fact that he's taking pictures of the murder location and those pictures are still on his phone. This is a very, very strong case. Pammy, thank you so much for becoming a new member. Welcome to the club. And are we ready to go, Kaylin, go ahead and start the defense? Let's go ahead and jump into, now, again, the defense here, what we're told is that this is going to be he was framed defense. So we'll see if they actually dive into that, both feet in the deep end, or if they kind of dance around it. Go ahead, Kaylin. Thank you so much.
Her Honor had said this morning that the defense may make an opening statement. You discussed yesterday and the day before that the defense may sit, not say a single word, not even ask a single question, not present a single piece of evidence, and be entitled to a verdict of not guilty. Oftentimes, defense attorneys, presumably at the get-go, appear to be tough cases. Sit back, wait, attempt to poke holes at the state's case as it's presented, but we're not going to do that. We're going to stand before you today and tell you what this case is about. Her Honor said this morning when she instructed you that it's upon you and you alone to make inferences from the evidence in this case. And when the evidence is complete and the evidence is closed, we're going to ask you to do that. This case is entitled The State of Nevada versus Robert Tellis.
Can you pause it, Kaylin?
A little bit about Mr. Tellis.
See, already, I think this guy is his demeanor is far more engaging. He has struck a theme. He talks about how, the defense usually doesn't have an opening. I'm going to do that because I'm not just going to stand back and let this case play out. I'm actually going to tell you what this case is all about. Disney Nerd 85 says, I just have to keep reminding myself that the defense attorney is just doing his job. He is just doing his job. And so far, I will say in those first few seconds, which again are really, really important seconds, I think he's doing a really good job of kind of, switching gears, changing up the narrative a little bit, talking about, how they're not just going to sit back. They intend to actually present a defense in this case, and they want the jurors to have an open mind. Sometimes you stand up as a defense attorney and it's just, can I splash some water on all of you folks and have you get out of the monotony of what you've just been listening to and realize that we actually intend to do our jobs here as well. I am going to knock him for one thing, and that is that he is wearing his wristwatch on his right hand, which always bothers me. No offense to anybody who's a right-hander with the wristwatch, but I never understood it. And already I'm going to diminish some points from him, but let's go ahead and see how he actually does in the presentation.
He's a family man, married, 3 children. He's a loving father and husband. He's a self-made man. He applied to our law school here, UNLV, and worked doing air conditioning, HVAC. It's a hard way to make a living, put himself through school. In addition to supporting his family and being engaged at school, he became the president of the University Bar. It's basically the student body president of his law school. He ran his own probate firm for 3 years and was named Pro Bono Attorney of the Year by the Nevada Legal Services in 2016.
Don't read off
the office.
Don't just read to us, dude. Well, this is
2019.
so annoying when they just read the
He was
PowerPoint.
determined at that point in time to clean up the office of the public administrator's office. He went in that office with the goal and with a mission. And as we had spoken briefly through the process of jury selection, he kind of upset the apple cart. He started eliminating unnecessary overtime. He wanted the office to run more efficiently. In some cases, we had public employees that are paid by our tax dollars reporting 40+ hours per week of overtime. And let me tell you, his changes at this office were not received well, and that created this hostile work environment. As a result of this hostility, reports were made, as they should be. Obviously, our public and our duly elected officials should be looked upon. It comes with the job. In Mr. Gehrman's first report, it states among the changes, Tellis has said he made our closing estate cases faster and cutting back on large amounts of tax-funded overtime employees are getting under Cahill. He provided a document that showed one veteran employee received more than $140,000 in overtime between 2017.
Kaylin, can you stop it for a sec? This is funny to me because what do we do? What are we doing defending his position as a administrator, as a politician? I'll tell you what we're doing. We're doing the job of the client who paid us to stand up here and defend him in this case. I can almost guarantee you, Tellis, if he didn't write, he redlined this opening statement, because why are we getting into all of the background on how he was just trying to do his best job? Thank you, Ashley. I try. Just trying to do the best job as an administrator. He was cutting out the fat. He was doing good by the taxpayers. Who cares, sir? You're charged with murder. And I realize that has to do a little bit with it has a lot to do with the motive behind all of this, but defending yourself as far as doing a good job does not change the fact that Gehrman was writing articles about you. That's the problem. Not that whether or not you were a good administrator or not, but that Gehrman was writing articles about you. So why are we in this world? Why do I have, question marks above my head as to why we're getting to all of this in the opening statements? I'll tell you why. Because Tellis told him to, because part of a narcissist is he doesn't even want to concede this point. Good opening statements, I think, usually have PowerPoints, but the good opening statements with a PowerPoint aren't just reading the PowerPoint to the jurors. I imagine all these jurors can read. Give them a presentation and let the PowerPoint do its own talking. All right, Kaylin, I'll hush up for a little bit.
He's combined $150,000 regular salary for those years. The employee overtime dropped to roughly $13,500 in 2020, which you can see is a substantial reduction, according to the document. Nicole Lofton, in a state court for the past year, said the old guard acts like a little gang and has tried to isolate her. Lofton said she has suffered from migraines and from stress. They told me from the beginning to pick a side, she said.
This is like a beef. This is an old beef of Tellis that he wants played out here in a courtroom where he's on trial for murder.
Of his allegedly hostile work environment. After being duly elected, Mr. Tellis also began evaluating the ethics of the office's relationship with third-party vendors. And you're going to hear that through the course of this case, because perhaps the state wants to make things simpler. This was part of the facts and the evidence from which.
Wait till I get all this coffee in me, Taryn.
He set out to identify the suspicious nature of businesses conducted by outside facilitators of administration operating under the Independent Administrations Act. And we need to just discuss this a little bit, because the RJ did a very good job of following up on this and reporting these problems. You have people who died. They don't have wills. They may not have heirs. They may not have estates. And unfortunately for them, their legacy is stolen by these third parties. Generally, if a person dies intestate, it goes to the public administrator's office, and they deal with the affairs, which often involves the sale of homes. Under this Independent Administrations
Because
Act,
he's a
there are third parties
narcissist.
who would come in, oftentimes with no announcement to the family members, take the properties. devalue the
Narcissist was
properties,
also
and
the
then
word
turn
of the
around
day
and
on
sell
my
them,
calendar.
and then
So
sell to a straw
that's
buyer,
why I'm
and
working it
ultimately
in as
sell
much
them
as I
again
can.
and make millions of dollars. Robert Tellis was determined to stop that, regardless of the consequences. What we saw here and what he saw when he began was basically corporate interest over public interest in the state of Nevada. We all experience that every day, from basically the national bird, the cones, to the casinos sucking money out of our
This is just
our
incredible.
society. for
This
their
is
own
just
gain.
incredible.
And that was
We're
occurring in
what?
the
How many
administrator's
minutes into
office
this
when Robert
thing?
Tellis was
And
elected.
this guy is spending most of the time talking about how
his
he was
review,
doing
he
a good
discovered
job
the
as an
public
administrator.
administrator's
You're
office had been
not
favoring
running for
Compass Realty
re-election,
in the
sir.
distribution of home sale contracts. Again, he was upsetting the apple cart. He saw this relationship as truly a violation of Nevada law and the code of ethics governing his office. He also discovered that Compass Realty was using the strawberry again to conduct this business and to hide their activities. It was an inherent conflict of interest, and Mr. Tellis was not going to stand still for this. In March 2022, Mr. Tellis contacted the duly elected district attorney, Steve Wolfson.
I think so, Royal Blue. I mean, we're certainly going to follow it. And we're going to try to get in as much live stuff as we can. So stay
It's
tuned.
appropriate for Mr. Wolfson to give an audience to Mr. Tellis. He did. Mr. Tellis called him, explained his concerns. Mr. Wolfson put him in contact with a detective, Jappy, a Metro Intelligence officer, who generally investigates public corruption. Mr. Wolfson felt that Detective Jappy could be of assistance to Mr. Tellis in this investigation because Mr. Tellis felt that laws were being broken and people were being stolen from, errors were being stolen from by these third parties. Mr. Tellis accepted this referral and contacted Mr. Jappy. Again, from the celibate extraction, we have records to corroborate this. Hi, detective, next time you call back, I'm hanging up on anyone else if I'm on a call, because this was very important to Mr. Tellis to get this investigation underway. Mr. Tellis put together a very exhaustive investigative report to expose this corruption. It was sent to Detective Jappy on March 6, 2022, and it names the individuals that Mr. Tellis was primarily concerned about. It contained evidence, it contained exhibits, it contained proof of this corruption that previously his office had turned a blind eye to, and it was a prior guard and ultimately the subsequent guard that went back to the same practices that would concern Mr. Tellis. Mr. Tellis and Detective Jappy agreed to meet and further discuss the possible bribery and corruption conspiracy that was occurring within his office. Again, the meeting was unavailable, but nonetheless, Mr. Tellis tried to follow through and is basically saying, hey, we need to get together. I need to provide this information.
I mean, we're
and
putting
discuss
up
the same.
exhibits about this whole
Detective Jappy
non-issue thing
returns
here.
the
It's like,
email. The text and says, no worries. Again, Mr. Tellis is following up because he wants to expose this corruption. During their meeting, and they ultimately met, Detective Jappy agreed with
again, I'm
Mr.
trying to
Wolfson's
stretch my
investigation,
brain to
and
figure out
Detective Jappy
how
would
this
assist in
helps them,
building a
and
case of
the
bribery
marginal
and
benefit
corruption.
of
See,
saying
the reason this is important,
that there
and we will get
was
there,
really
we
no
begin to
corruption,
unfold this
therefore
story
he
for
really
you.
didn't have a
Should
motivation.
be
Just
some
doesn't seem like
irregularities,
it's worth
which
the
we're
waste
gonna
of
present to you
time in
again.
this opening
You
statement.
are called upon to make your interest.
Yeah, he can
from the
get
state of the evidence.
very good, CJ. They're not mutually exclusive. Yeah, you're not guilty
In
of
reference to one of these three
of being a
individuals
bad
contained within his exhaustive
employer,
report,
but you are guilty of murder. So, job
Mr.
well
Tellis
done.
states, hey,
Clap,
Derek, I'm
clap.
supposed to have a meeting with this individual and her counsel next week. If you think I try to need to get any specific statements, please give me a call to discuss. He responds, thank you, sir. We'll reach out tomorrow. Detective Jappy initiated his own investigation and began surveillance. So we have police actors, Metro actors now acting as a consequence or as a result of Mr. Tellis's effort. And we have this surveillance that occurs on April 27th, 2022. And this surveillance is conducted because of what Mr. Tellis was doing. Metro Intelligence was getting involved. Because of this involvement and because of this independent investigation.
You might be
Mr.
right,
Tellis had
Pokemon.
initially begun,
Maybe that's where
those
he's trying to bring this full
Public
circle. Is
Administrator's
that,
office
you
began
know,
to push back.
it's these
Oftentimes,
other
human beings
guys
were not
that
happy,
killed them.
especially when it affects
Who
the
know,
bottom
you
line
know,
of other
maybe,
people.
maybe,
That's what
maybe
occurred in
we're
this
playing
office.
3D
In addition
chess
to their
here, and I'm
hostility
just
towards
not
the
getting
new
it.
employees brought in, Rita Reid and her supporters began following Mr. Tellis to dig up dirt on him. They captured images which you saw in the state's opening statement of Mr. Tellis and Miss Lee Kennan getting out of the back of the vehicle, and used this to persuade Jeff German to investigate. Now, Jeff German has been in this community for a lot of years, and if he's presented evidence on the other side of the equation, he looks into it, and he did as a result of this old guard trying to get rid of Mr. Tellis. During their investigation, and that being the old guard, Rita Reid announces that she will oppose Robert Tellis in the upcoming election for public administrator. 2 weeks after the first article is published, she receives a campaign contribution from Compass Realty and Adam Fenn totaling $10,000. And oftentimes you hear follow the money. Well, that's what Mr. Tellis was asking Detective Jaffe to do. At this point in time, and this is curious, and this runs into this murder investigation, Detective Jaffe pivots. Initially, he's looking at the true bad actors in this case, but he pivots and begins looking at Robert Tellis, the whistleblower, the person who initiated this investigation and who's trying to bring Metro in to investigate the wrongdoing. Hey, sir, two things. Just wanted to know we are still working on
Not
what we've
just
talked
you,
about.
Pammy.
Starting to get a better understanding of what's going on. Second, saw the article today and just want to make sure you're all good. Now, this is in reference to that first article that Mr. Garriman wrote. And this is Detective Jaffe communicating with Mr. Tellis. Mr. Tellis responds, "Thanks, I'm hanging in there. I'll forward you the truth of the matter." It states that, and that's just how Mr. Tellis was feeling.
Can you pause it, Kaylin? I mean, here's the other thing to think about too, is that this opening statement is not just, you know, this is their case, right? So they're going to present all of this at the trial as well, I imagine. The prosecution didn't spend any time on this, but these exhibits that we're all seeing here, they've been litigated ahead of time. They intend to actually lay the foundation and present all of this evidence in court in their case, likely in the defense case, unless there's some opportunity to present it in cross-examination. But I doubt that there will be, because the prosecution's really not concerned with all of this nonsense. So you're right. Maybe there is a theory that these are the people who are actually motivated to kill Gehrman because they're really the corrupt politicians, and they're trying to frame poor Robert Tellis because he's an easy patsy or something. Yeah, I don't know, connect all the, all the yarn to all the push pins and figure that one out. But I mean, think about this. This isn't the last time we're going to hear all of this in this trial. They fully intend to present all of this. How many witnesses are they going to call to lay the foundation for all of this? And the jurors will have to sit through all of this again. Yeah, usually you see in a defense opening that they're a little more vague, not because they're lazy, but because it's a smart strategy to sit back and see what the prosecution might do before you really show your hand. They've shown their hand here. They're going to have to back this all up. And all of this, to me, seems like a side quest rather than really helping out in their defense. Maybe he was extorted like Charlie Adelson. Maybe he was extorted by Charlie Adelson. That would be the real clincher. I'm surprised he didn't bring that up. Maybe that's later on in the closing here, or the opening here. Go ahead, Kaylin. Oh, I imagine Gehrman was scratching him to defend his life, as sad as that is. Sorry.
Detective Jaffe responds.
Great question,
May 16th, you see at the bottom. I understand that completely. Sorry you have to go through this, but the truth will always come out and prevail. And through the course of this trial, Mr. Tellis is going to ask for you to be willing to let the truth prevail. This is of concern. Now, on June 23rd, 2022, Kimberly McMahon, a former real estate agent who provided services for the public administrator, reaches out to Alicia Goodwin, the member of the old guard. All right. We have an email indicating that. Again, we have Goodwin, who's part of the old guard, and we have Kimberly McMahon somehow getting involved in influencing Detective Jaffe. We have Kimberly McMahon, who is a former real estate agent and officer, wanting to get together and discuss these articles and what's going on in the public administrator's office. This goes so far that on 8/9,
Exactly, Disney nerd.
Detective Jappy is approached by Ms. McMahon. It's our belief, and we believe this will be disclosed through the course of this trial, that Alicia Goodwin and Rita Reed put her up to this. McMahon states, and I will submit to you, there will be no evidence produced that this is true, but McMahon told Jappy that there was some attempt to receive kickbacks in exchange for real estate listings referred to the public administrator's office. So again, the very thing that he's accusing others of is getting turned on him. And we're having Detective Jappy, we have Metro pivoting. And Ms. McMahon gives the formal interview with Jappy. So we're now again having this pushback from the old guard as a result of Mr. Tellis's involvement and calling in. I mean, we have this gentleman that's on trial in this case calling in for the assistance of Metro to discover and expose this corruption. This is what's really important. At the time of the alleged solicitation of kickbacks, where she's claiming that that man is
Hey,
soliciting
Royal Blue.
kickbacks from
Welcome
her,
aboard. Thank
she's
you so
kinda got a dual
much.
thing going on. At the time, she's a lieutenant for the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department and also a real estate agent. We're to believe that a public official is trying to solicit bribes from a police officer, and I submit to you that the facts will show and common sense will dictate that that's just absurd. This very same public official, Robert Tellis, is the one that conducted his own investigation, his own independent investigation, to try and bring Metro attention to this corruption.
He's trying to
We're
paint
now to
him
believe
as
that
a
this gentleman's
hero.
actually soliciting
If
kickbacks.
you
from
don't
Metro
think
detectives.
Tellis
In
transcribed
response to
this
McMahon,
from behind bars.
Detective Jappy files an application for a PIN register and a trap and trace with a real-time precision location of Mr. Tellis's cell phone. Now, this is important, and see, this is the crossover, and why it's important for you to understand the factual backdrop of all the facts in this case. Mr. Tellis is actually subject to this PIN register, this trap and trace device during the time that this murder is allegedly committed by him. See, what happens is in today's modern reality, everything oftentimes boils down to the cell phones. I mean, every second that we have the cell phones with us, there's messages being sent, there's signals being sent 1,000 times a second to nearby cell towers, ultimately through satellites. I mean, our position and our whereabouts is tracked all the time. So Detective Jappy submits this warrant because we have a privacy right in our phones. He submits a warrant to a judge and gets an order authorizing Mr. Tellis to, in essence, be tracked. Now, this PIN register does not capture the content of communications. It doesn't capture the information that's sent via text or otherwise, but it collects what they call the metadata. It gets your location, sometimes within feet. Oftentimes it's in relation to a cell phone tower, but it's more specific than that. You get the data concerning who's calling, who's sending, and who's receiving communications. Again, there's a Fourth Amendment protection, but we don't get into the content of the conversation, but it lets us know, it lets law enforcement know who Mr. Tellis is communicating with, where he's at, in essence, what he's doing in relation to the people he's in communication with as a result.
He wanted to make sure he wasn't going to be hit by a car.
This is the warrant produced and obtained by Detective Jappy based upon that former, but she was at the time when these solicitations supposedly occurred, was a Metro detective. On the same day, and this is August 17th, Detective Jappy initiates surveillance of Mr. Tellis. We have a surveillance log, August 17th, 2022. So in truth, we have this full pivot that occurs, which is apparently based upon these allegations made by Ms. McMahon at the insistence of the old guard. What's interesting is during this August 17th, 2022 surveillance, you got Mr. Tellis taking care of his family. I mean, he's been away, he's been an official, he's lost his election. I mean, he's going back, focusing on what's important. He's focusing on his family. The surveillance that's being conducted by Metro Intelligence, I mean, they've got him going to Home Depot, picking up food at Chipotle. He's with family, he's home. Nothing more. On September 2nd, the tragic murder of
These
Jeff German occurs. But it's important for you to know
PowerPoint
that this murder
slides are going to be
occurs
the death of me.
with the track and
Just
trace
say
active
it, dude.
on
Nobody
Robert
wants to
Tellis's
read it.
telephone. Detective Jappy and Metro captures no cell site location data which would implicate Robert Tellis in the murder of Jeff Garman. We do know that at some point in that day, there were signals being received and sent, but the cell phone doesn't put Robert Tellis there. He's at home. He's not at home the entire day. Around noon, evidence will be presented to you that he's at a gym working out. And this is after he supposedly commits this murder. Another thing needs to be pointed out.
By the way, for
Brad
those
Rubin on
keeping score, it's
this
taken us
knowledge from
this
surveillance
long
video
to
was
actually
never
get to talking about the murder.
identified. Obviously, the state's going to call upon you to make references. But a DMV search produced 67 possible hits for the vehicle, matching that description. And what's important to note, it's Metro who should be objectively and even-handedly obtaining information, searching for evidence, never follows up on the other vehicles. From the get-go, they're concerned with Robert Tellis and Robert Tellis alone. This is the email confirming, and this is Metro emails concerning the 67 red Denali's that basically match the description of the one that you watched the video of, that we all watched it together just moments ago. Ms. Weckley did an apt job of laying out the crime scene, and you will see many photos of the crime scene. There's blood everywhere. I mean, this was a stabbing. There's blood in the bushes. There's blood on the ground. There's blood all over Jeff Garman as he lays dead on the side of his house. The state has shown you and will show you many more pictures of the DNA that's claimed to have been found under Jeff Garman's nails. But what's very important, and we'd ask you to take into account all of the evidence or the lack of the evidence in this case, is that no blood whatsoever is found on Mr. Tellis.
That's also a good
This
point.
struggle
I mean, these are not, you know, these are not
If it had in fact been Mr. Tellis, that there would have been exchange of blood.
complete swing and misses
And
here.
there will be a
Those
great
are
deal of
good
testimony
points.
concerning DNA. Inferences will be made and inferences will be drawn and inferences will be attacked concerning the significance of the state's findings. The shoes that you were shown photos of that were recovered at Mr. Tellis' residence, no blood whatsoever on them.
Good point.
The bag that's found in his garage or in the room, storage room, no blood whatsoever found on that bag. The hat that they claim they found cut up, again, no connection, no tie whatsoever to Jeff Garman. There is no rational explanation as to why the hat and shoes were cut into pieces, except that it's probably easier to conceal and plant. Why else would they be cut up? Why would they be in that strange condition? What's important, again, is there's no blood on them. There's nothing tying those articles that were found in Mr. Tellis' house to Jeff Garman. A witness provided a statement to police that the killer was spotted in the same outfit days before the murder, acting suspiciously. That was never followed up on. Somebody similarly dressed, similarly clothed. No follow-up, because from the get-go, Robert Tellis was the target of this investigation. What's also important is the cell site location does not place him near that part where the individual matching this description previously was found. I'd also submit to you its significance is this meandering. That was the state's words, the meandering before this attack occurred. There's going to be a claim and an argument made that Mr. Tellis was researching this location, or they believe it was him. Why the meandering if it was him? The washing of the vehicles, and this is important because warrants were based upon this. Mr. Tellis was again subject to surveillance after the date of Jeff Garman's murder. He's surveilled by Metro Intelligence washing 3 vehicles in front. At that point in time, again, maybe there's been another pivot, but at that point in time, Metro felt that he was destroying evidence. Maybe he was cleaning up. Reason would make it
Yeah,
a
Jody,
reasonable argument.
I
Reason would obviously
I
dictate
don't
that
know. I'm sorry.
the person's involved in this stabbing gets into the vehicle, and there's obviously blood. Wouldn't there be blood on the vehicle? Wouldn't there be blood on the brakes, on the floor mats, somewhere inside the vehicle? Well, none was ever found. And in fact, this surveillance, and previous to this hearing, issues were made concerning this attempt to conceal evidence. Well, there was no evidence to dispose of. And the surveillance of him washing the outside of these 3 vehicles, and this is on September 6th. This is 4 days later. There's no evidence whatsoever and no videos, no filming of him trying to conceal any evidence in reference to the subject vehicle or the other 2. I would submit to you that the facts would show and read, common sense would dictate that if he were trying to conceal a crime, he wouldn't wash all 3 vehicles. And obviously, he would be concerned with the inside of the vehicle. Now, on this September 6th surveillance, it makes reference to a prior surveillance of Mr. Tellis on September 1st. Again, of no import, of no importance. Again, no evidence inside that vehicle tying Mr. Tellis to any crimes whatsoever. Now, is Mr. Tellis in a position to say who killed Mr. Garman? No. But I would submit to you the facts will show, and the reasonable inferences that you are to take from the evidence is that there would be DNA evidence inside that vehicle, on the shoes, on any clothing from Mr. Tellis. A picture was shown of Mr. Tellis's finger. It'll be argued through the course of this case that was somehow caused by this murder that occurred. There's no blood left at the scene where Mr. Garman was murdered either. Nothing, not on the bushes, not on the rocks, not on Mr. Garman. Mr. Tellis explains that to detectives how we got that wound, but that will come through the course of this trial. What's of concern, and the reason that we've given you this backdrop to give you all the evidence, is somewhat strange behavior on behalf of Mr. Chapman. Now, he's Metro Intelligence. The Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department is divided up into various details. Each department has their own responsibilities, their own special training. They work.
Yeah, Tanya,
it's an effective way to conduct investigations.
I talked about this earlier. I
Primary
think he's
detective in this
absolutely
case,
going to
Detective
take
Gadsden,
the
they work as
stand
a team. She was the primary.
for
They work
exactly the
together,
reasons you
and they
say.
work.
He's
You've
both
got the robbery
narcissistic
detail that
and
investigates
crazy enough.
robberies. You've got the financial crimes that investigates financial crimes. You've got Metro Intelligence that generally investigates allegations and facts concerning corruption. But in this case, you've got Detective Jappy inserting himself in this murder investigation concerning Mr. Tellis. In fact, there's an email wherein Jappy implicates Tellis to Gaddis. So early on, we've got Detective Jappy, who obviously previously was directed by this old guard, now pointing the finger at Mr. Tellis to the lead detective in this homicide investigation. During a traffic stop, and this is the significance of Mr. Tellis. See, Metro has a policy that you're to have body cam on, all right? All civilian interactions should be captured because we want to know what the truth is. We want to have an objective record of what occurs. This initial contact with Mr. Tellis occurs on the 7th, and after he's charged and this case begins, repeated requests are made for this body cam. In fact, our judge, I was not on the case at that time, but our judge makes an order on July 18th, 2023 to turn that over. It's learned that over a month after that order is made, that evidence is destroyed. Detective Jappy is also present at the arrest and jumps into the ambulance and rides with Mr. Tellis. Now, it's anticipated that the state is going to argue to you that this suicide is somehow a consciousness of guilt. Apparently, he just couldn't live with himself for a murder that they feel that he committed. I would submit to you in the facts, the reasonable inferences to be drawn from these facts is at this point in time now, Mr. Tellis's life is coming apart. They've been in contact with him. They came into contact with him 2 times on September 7th. The first time they come, they speak to him. They say, we have warrants. He cooperates. They strip him of his clothes. They put him in a white paper suit. They've swabbed his mouth. Obviously, they're investigating him and they're coming down. I would submit to you that a reasonable inference is that there's an attempt by Mr. Tellis to kill himself, not as a difficulty, oh my gosh, I feel guilty for something they say I did, but his life was coming apart then. It truly was. He lost an election. It was giving him an opportunity to go back, be with his family. But now he was getting pressed in charge for a murder of which he's maintained his innocence. There's 3 surreptitious recordings that occur by the homicide detectives. And what's interesting and disturbing to note is Detective Jappy inserts himself into this interview, this surreptitious recording. Talk about another investigation. So again, we have Detective Jappy inserting himself into homicides investigation.
So true, Mel.
I would submit to you a reasonable inference would be that trying to dictate the direction that the homicide investigation is taking. we would submit to you that reasonable minds may disagree or could agree that losing your job is not a motive for murder.
Mm.
Their entrance was made in these tweets, and it's kind of curious now, the age that we live in. I mean, we have presidents that commute via tweets. We have tweets from Mr. Tellis, an elected official, concerning the articles. Wife here's wrestling in the trash. Her honey is a wild animal in the trash. Me, no dear, looks like Jeff German going through our trash for his 4th story on me. Smiley face. Oh shoot, I left the pizza box and sushi containers in the trash. In the next article, I'm going to have mob in jacuzzi ties. He's making fun of these. And then you can see the dates, June 18th and June 25th. Again, he's not particularly happy about these articles, but he's reaching out. I mean, he's lost his election. Typical bully, can't take a pound of criticism after sleeping.
Also not getting many likes on those tweets.
Now.
Just saying.
You'd think he'd have better things to do. He's addressing these articles in the appropriate way in a public forum. That's what elected officials, regardless if they're high-level, low-level officials, they address, as he did previously. He addresses, as you saw, the presentation, the digital presentation after he learned of the articles. He's addressing his constituency. That's what an elected official is supposed to do. That's a reasonable response to criticism, which comes from the job. Again, these articles were not a motive for a murder. And we all know killing a journalist does not kill a story. Killing Jeff German does not kill the investigation or the stories concerning Mr. Tellis. One would think the reporting is heavy on that. One can imagine what it would be for a murder. Obviously, if one's concerned about negative reporting, one doesn't want to commit a murder because obviously the reporting is going to be far more severe. Mr. Tellis was a lawyer prior to this, and he was on his way back becoming a lawyer. However, we do have a predatory corporation losing millions of dollars as a result of his whistleblowing.
Guilty. He's a lawyer.
He was communicating with Detective Jaffe. He wanted to right these wrongs as he was exiting the office. There are others that had far more motive to make it look like he was the killer and to conduct this killing, because Jeff German was a good reporter. He would ultimately get to what the truth was and what was really going on in that office and with these third-party vendors. Killing an investigative journalist, there's no more follow-up information concerning these millions of dollars when the old guard is now put back into place. German's gone now. I mean, Jeff German did a good job of digging and finding things. We've all heard about it. We all know, we all respected him. He would take on tough opponents, dangerous opponents.
I like that, Pamela.
Jeff German was no stranger to making people upset. He made a lot of people.
This closing, I feel like was over 15 minutes ago, and this is the longest closing credits I've ever seen.
In fact, there was proof of it found on his devices. He was known for the boldness of his inquiries, taking on corrupt and violent targets through the course of his investigative journalism. It came with his job, and it's unfortunate that we no longer have him.
Stop lying to people. Whoever the guy was that wrote that article the other day, you need to fire his ass. Stop lying to people. We're coming for your ass. We are watching you motherfuckers. You better fire that son of a bitch. I'm coming down there tomorrow, motherfucker.
That sounds like a
Jeff German received this threat.
Peace-seeking individual.
For his murder.
You guys just did some propaganda shit out, motherfuckers. Just remind you fucking pieces of shit. You left-wing fucking faggot, fucking socialist, fucking big motherfuckers. You guys will pay in the end, motherfuckers. You fucking cheated and lied. You guys fucking lied to me. And you now, I know this fucking box shit, motherfuckers. Fuck you, you piece of shit, you motherfuckers. You made the Republic fight again, and you guys are fucking dead motherfuckers someday, motherfuckers.
What?
The defense, and again, that's whether we had our founding fathers had this wisdom. The defense can't prove any of those gentlemen did this. We're not saying they did. We don't know.
What just happened?
We don't know what investigative steps at all were taken to follow up on these two threats that we know of close in time to Jeff German's murder. State could say this is the lunatic fringe, this is to be disregarded, but nonetheless, when you have objective fact finders, when you have people that are truly in search of the truth, you should investigate all avenues. Keeping the burden where it should be on the state. And at the close of this case, we are going to ask you to return a verdict of not guilty. Thank you.
Okay, this time we'll break for lunch during this recess.
Okay. I was so tuned out at the end. I kind of missed what that last message was. Was that supposed? I'm sorry. Was that supposed to be Tellez leaving that message? That was the high note that you ended on as an attorney. I'm looking at the comments here. I'm at a complete loss because threatening calls that Tellez received. Well, fairly poor job of explaining that at the end, because that did not seem like the high note that you wanted to go out on. But I mean, listen, I'll say this. I think he did a fairly good job. I think he had a difficult job to do. This is a difficult case to defend. He's not working with much, and I think he's obviously got a client who's steering the wheel more than most. And so, his presentation, fine. He tried to do as much as he could and make as many points as he could. Problem was, I felt like they wasted so much time at the front when he had everyone's attention on this just ego campaign on behalf of Tellez to explain how he really is a great employer and he really was a great politician. And I felt like he was going to ask for donations from the jurors at the end of it, that it really didn't seem to make sense as to why you're stealing these 12 people's time and having them sit here right now with the man accused of murder. Other thing I would say is that the PowerPoint was driving me nuts. When I was a DA, I got to the point where my PowerPoints had 0 words on them. It was just pictures and it was just exhibits and evidence. When you watch the nightly news, you're not watching the anchor with a text of all the bullet points of what he's telling you behind him on the screen. You're watching them talk you through the images and evidence and everything else. And I think that's what makes for a good presentation in court. But this was not that. But in the sake of fairness, he did make, I think, a couple of points that are worth talking about. And then I'll take whatever questions you guys have along the way as I'm kind of closing us out here. But the one thing he talked about is how there were other cars registered that were similar description to that vehicle. That's a good point. Now, you may say, yeah, but 67 cars registered and 66 of them were at a different location. But he made the point of that they didn't pursue any of those other cars. Whenever you have an opportunity as a defense attorney to make a rush to judgment argument or a myopic argument on the part of the investigators, go ahead and go for that, because that might get some jurors questioning whether or not they were, ignoring other possible suspects and instead just zeroing in on your client. Again, I'm not saying any of these are going to win the day, but with what he's got to work with, that was one of his stronger arguments that he could have made. Probably should have presented that up front. Probably should not have waited till we were all halfway asleep and 3/4 of the way through his presentation. The other thing that he talked about was the amount of blood at that crime scene. And wouldn't you expect that blood to be all over the shoes and all over his clothing and therefore all over the house and everything else? Again, not a bad point, right? That's a fairly convincing argument as far as if he really was involved, you would expect, especially the shoes, to be covered in blood. Now, here's a thing that I talked about many times as a prosecutor, and that's the idea that the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. What that means is just because you cannot find the DNA on the shoes doesn't mean the shoes weren't there. The absence of evidence does not mean does not mean that you can rule out that his shoes, his hat, his clothing were in the vicinity of that murder. Now, the defense is well within their rights to call into question why not, and why at a bloody scene wouldn't it be found? Wouldn't you expect it to be? But that's a far more kind of appealing to people's logic than it is an actual scientific forensic argument. Many, many times at bloody murder scenes, there may not be any DNA evidence found on the suspect. does not mean that you can rule the suspect out. Raven points out, unless his shoes were off and he had another pair of shoes in the bag. Absolutely. I mean, that's exactly my point. Just because those shoes weren't covered in blood doesn't mean that there are not some shoes, dumped off of the Hoover Dam that were covered in blood. I know that, and Pammy points out that there was blood on the cut up shoe, but I didn't hear them get into the idea that that matched for DNA, unless I entirely missed that. I was waiting for that because that, to me, you've got defendant's DNA under victim's fingernails, then you would expect victim's DNA on defendant's shoes to be an important point that was made by the prosecutor, but I didn't hear any of that come out. Again, maybe some of this will come to light as the trial goes on, but oh, thank you so much, Stephanie. I appreciate you being here and for listening along with us. So, I think what we can learn, having watched this together, is I'm going to always maintain my objectivity and try to let the case and the evidence play itself out. But wowzer, is this a strong case? I mean, whenever you have DNA evidence, you're always going to have a strong case. But DNA evidence is circumstantial evidence, right? It is circumstantial evidence. It's not direct evidence of having witnessed the crime. But this case, you then have video evidence, which is direct evidence. You then have the other circumstantial evidence of the vehicle, and and then add on top of that, the cherry on top is the high motive evidence on all of this. I think it's a very, very strong case, a very difficult case for the defense. I think he did an admirable job with what he had to work with, which wasn't a whole heck of a lot. And you've got a client who's, I'm fully convinced, is a raging narcissist to, politician type levels, who is really driving the defense strategy on this, including, I want you to spend the lion's share of your argument pointing out what a good employer I was and how I was just a hero trying to expose corruption myself. Victoria says, yes, there were threats to Gehrman. Defense was arguing that he received threats fairly regularly. Were they investigated, was his argument. Oh, okay. That there were other people who wanted this man dead. Yeah, that's also a good argument by the defense, is that, Gehrman was, and it sounds like that is absolutely true. He was not a man who cared about making enemies. He was a man who cared about exposing the truth. And even if that meant that he got some very powerful enemies, which included mobsters, by the way. So are there other people out there who may have wanted him dead? Sure. Like an argument that can be made, and an argument that should have been made by the defense, and perhaps maybe a little more clearly and perhaps highlighted earlier on. There's an abundance of evidence for the prosecution to work with, not so much for the defense. Absolutely. And that's just the facts, folks. You can't judge the attorneys for dealing with the facts that were handed to them. They can't do anything about that. But I think it's going to be a fascinating case. It's a fascinating case because you've got a fascinating figure at the center of it. You've got this guy who is power hungry and manipulative and got a fantastic haircut, and he looks like he fits the part for what he's being accused of. And he takes it upon himself to don this elaborate disguise to try to cover up, which is essentially a premeditated murder. This is a premeditated murder with lying in wait. In many jurisdictions, they would have sought the death penalty on this, and I'm surprised that they didn't here, because it is available to them in Nevada. But they're making their own, using their own discretion. But you've got all of those fascinating aspects that, you could easily see this being a made-for-TV type of movie. And then he executes this guy, and he's undone, of course, by his own cleverness. It's the ridiculous outfit that is a large part of why we can tie him to this crime. Had he worn more kind of everyday clothing, then finding that sun hat wouldn't be an issue, right? But it's this ridiculous hat that is part of what they find in the recovery of the search warrant. Royal Blue says, is it circumstantial if the defendant's DNA is under the victim's fingernails? Circumstantial just means that somebody hasn't witnessed it. It's not direct evidence. It's evidence that you can, you need one step in logical thinking to prove the point that it's trying to make. So yes, circumstantial DNA found under the fingernails of a person means that it is logical. The next step is that that person was in contact with that other person. So the DNA found under the fingernails means that he was in contact with, in close proximity to, and likely scratched the defendant in this case. So it's circumstantial, like a fingerprint might be. It doesn't tell you that the person, you're not witnessing the person committing the murder, but it's circumstantial evidence that that person was there at the time. But that's not to take away, again, circumstantial evidence is sometimes the most powerful evidence, and that's not to take away from the fact of how powerful that evidence is, that it's DNA of the defendant found under the victim's fingernails. I mean, how much more, smoking gun, blood crying out from the ground type of evidence do you have to have? So again, we will continue to try to follow this case. But they still would have to see the glare on his head. Absolutely right. We will have to follow up this case as much more as we possibly can after this, and keep you guys updated. I expect this case will kind of move along quickly. In the meantime, I'm going to have to do those obligatory. If you guys haven't already, please subscribe. If you haven't liked this stream, please make sure that you take a moment to do that. We have memberships now, and we're really, really making efforts. Behind the scenes are Kaylin and Tiffany working their tails off to try to bring you all as much content for those new subscribers, so that you can have, just more access to what we're doing behind the scenes and everything else. And yeah, we're almost up to 5,000 subscribers. We're very proud of that. We're a small channel, but we're growing quickly, and it's just a matter of getting the word out there for people to know about it, and hopefully offering benefits like the things that we are on. Memberships will get us there. Live breaking down Donna Adels's motions. Yeah, I think we were talking about doing that. If we're not going to do it live, we're going to talk about it on our weekly Friday episode, which was the other thing I wanted to talk about. If you guys are new to the channel, there's one thing that will never change, and that is that every Friday we have a weekly episode where we break down everything that happened in the week and try to keep you guys all updated. And in adding to that is all of this new stuff, all of the memberships and all of the live streams. And we have a new series called Case Notes. We just dropped an episode on Tuesday that got into the murder of Rachel Morin. Really, really awful case about a Maryland woman. Just went out for a jog. Mother of 5, going out for a jog. Never seen alive again. And the investigators go across the country and outside of the country to find her murderer. And we have some new bits and pieces coming up, and I'm kind of blanking on what all of that stuff is now. But also, I know a lot of you guys are fans of Jay from the Shaming of Jay and J-Bone Nation, and he was a guest on my other podcast with True Crime News. So if you guys get a chance to check that out, he did a fantastic job. And Tiffany says, yeah, please to check out True Crime News with Jay. Exactly what I was saying. He did a fantastic job. We had a really, really good conversation. So it's getting about that time where I would like to put my little girls, say goodnight to them and have them go to bed. But I've really enjoyed this. Thank you guys so much for being along for this entire stream. And I hope that you, got something out of this. I think it was really fun to watch it with you live and be able to react to it because, it got boring at parts, but I will say that the evidence in this case is fascinating stuff. The way that the police piece this together is remarkable to me. And any case where you just have a person, can you imagine an elected official who is just so full of themselves that they take it upon themselves to kill another person just because they said some nasty words in a news article? Nasty words, by the way, that you earned every single one of them. So with that all being said, I'm going to go have some chamomile tea with honey to rest my voice and go tuck my little girls into bed, and wish you all a pleasant evening. And I hope that you all tune in for the episode that we have coming out Friday, and check out the other content that we have on the channel. But in the meantime, thank you guys so much. And it was so great seeing you all. Have a great night.